Hi there, my friends, and welcome back. If you're like me, I was thinking today it would be a lot more fun if we were talking about something else, like going to the beach or maybe sharing recipes or something we love doing, like traveling. But grief is not a bad thing to talk about because, there's a lot of good news about it. In future videos, I'm going to get into some of that about some of the unexpected gifts that can happen during the process of getting through a grief event. But today we are on the fifth myth of grief, and that is be strong for others. So in the last video that I did, we talked about that myth, that the myth that grief just takes time. We focused on the idea that, for recovery and completion, taking time, you know, time might decrease the intensity of the loss, but it really does nothing to actually clear the loss for you, help you recover from it. It's more the actions that you take while time is passing that allows you to heal. So today I'm going to kind of bust myth number 5 for you, and that is be strong. And it's one I'm really familiar with because I use that um, for all three of the losses that I had, my kids passing, but especially with my daughter who passed. And I'm sure that it caused some profound problems over the years for my kids. So I really am kind of on a mission to make sure everyone understands how detrimental this one can be. So if you've experienced this expectation to be strong for a grief event, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know that it does nothing to help you face the reality of a loss and begin to heal. In my work with clients, I've rarely met anyone who hasn't heard or done this be strong strategy. It's just so common um, in response to affecting emotional events and how we deal with them. And it's really counterproductive, especially where children are concerned, because it teaches them the wrong thing. It teaches them that there's something wrong with expressing or feeling your emotions, and that the thing you really need to do is hide them away, and that definitely creates long-term problems. On one hand, it's kind of understandable that as a short-term strategy, we would employ Be Strong because, I mean, let's face it, when someone has passed, we have to get through the practical issues of, planning for the memorial or whatever service we're going to have, and there's, settling estates or taking care of family members. So there part of it is we have to deal with it, and we have to gather enough strength that we can cope with those things. But this false idea of covering up and pushing away, even while you're doing those things, covering up and pushing away the natural emotions that come up, um, is very harmful. And it's not only harmful to us, but as I mentioned before, it gives other people the impression that this is okay, and it doesn't really allow you to move into the phase of healing that you need to be in. It's We get confused between the energy we need to focus on those things and using it as a long-term strategy for healing, and those are two completely different things. So in attempting to be strong or be strong for others, we're denying our normal and natural reaction to loss. It's the natural verbal and nonverbal responses. We may say that yes, we're doing fine. We may we're hiding any kind of sadness or depression and putting on a strong face, and we're lying to the people that we're interacting with, not to mention that we're lying to ourselves. And grief is cumulative, and it's cumulatively negative. So when we're convincing ourselves that we're strong, I know I can get through this, I can get over this, which yes, in the right way you can. But if you're not doing it by facing those feelings, it makes it much harder long term. We can't continue to live this outward lie and also expect to begin the healing process. So when you're asked how you feel at times when you're not fine, how often do you say I'm fine if somebody says how are you? Probably quite a bit, if maybe not even all the time, right? But if I asked, how often do you like to be lied to? That would probably be never. None of us likes that. So if you lie about how you feel from time to time and that you don't like being lied to, that's a pretty clear indication that the myth of being strong is at odds with what feels authentic, truthful, and really important to you. So there's a lot of lot of reasons that account for that disconnect between, what we do and how we feel and how we're affected by what others do. And one of them traces back to one of those first myths that we talked about in the series, and that's the myth of don't feel bad. That's the number one that we talked about. So if we're not supposed to feel bad or sad when something painful happens to us, then it follows automatically that we'll have to pretend to feel good and feel strong, and even when we don't, and in order to honor the dangerous idea that we aren't supposed to feel bad, that's what we say. We say, I'm doing fine. I'm just doing fine. And if you recall that third myth that we talked about, the grieve alone myth, which means you don't show anyone how you really feel if you're sad. So all of these are adding up. There's one building on top of the other, and they all culminate in a really hot mess when it comes to healing. So that's yet another incorrect idea that causes us to sink into this myth of being strong and hiding how you feel. So now that you have a sense of the problem associated with the myth of being strong, I'm going to suggest the solution in a simple phrase. You can be strong or you can be human. But let's also be real for a moment. I know from experience that we don't always feel comfortable opening a conversation with just anyone. It's uncomfortable to let people know that you feel like the world has ended and you can't, you can barely get out of bed and that you have no enthusiasm at all for life. Those are not the kind of conversations that we are comfortable opening up with to just anyone, and that's okay. It's not necessary to confide the depth of your feelings to everyone. I want to make that really clear when I talk about this concept of being strong. But learning to be genuine in dealing with loss is important, because the more we pretend that everything is okay, the longer we delay our healing. So consider saying something simple like this, just when someone asks you how you are, you can say something as simple as, and this would be honest, some days are better than others. Today happens to be a day when things are tough, but thanks, I appreciate your asking. And when you end it with that phrase or something like it, thanks, I appreciate you asking, um, it does one of two things. They'll ask you if they are the kind of person who can hold space for you and are comfortable in just listening. They'll ask you to share more if they know you well and if they're willing to listen. But by closing your statement with thanks, I appreciate you asking, it can also, if they're not so inclined like that, it can ease them out of the conversation in a way that's not uncomfortable for either of you. And at the same time, you've been honest and they've been kind enough to ask. So it's important to identify the close friends or family members who are willing to simply listen and be okay with your most emotional response to that question. That's okay. Often it's the time we let our guard down and let the emotions flow, and when we can be fully honest. So know that that's okay to do that. So I'd like to close with the number one reason that this be strong myth is so damaging, especially if you have children, because it inadvertently teaches, and I touched on this at the beginning, it inadvertently teaches others that getting over someone who was deeply loved or any grief event at all is something that happens if we don't think too much about it, right? So we pretend that if it's just in the background, we can just get on with our life and not think about it and everything will be okay. With children especially, that can lead to a lot of unresolved grief later in their later years. I will share with you that my son, who was 12 when my daughter was dying from cancer, he was, he saw me be strong, but I didn't, because I all through that period when she was ill and after she passed, I projected this aura of being strong, and he therefore hid a lot of his pain. They were very, very close, and he told me many years later that he'd hid a lot of his pain because he was afraid that it would make me sad. And so if only I had been more upfront with him, maybe we could have even cried together. And it wasn't that we never talked about his sister. We often did, but we did not explore on a deeper level what that was like for us. And that, especially if it's a child, um, I would counsel you that that is a good thing to watch out for. So I mentioned that, grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative. And going through that loss with of my daughter, uh, and my son, and he subsequently did actually take his life many years later, and I knew it wasn't simply from the loss of his sister or my failure to teach him how to grieve properly. He had some other existential things going on, but nevertheless I'm sure that it did impact him. um, so the antidote to this is to be as open and honest as possible. And it's okay to say to your loved ones, even to your children, because they're very observant. They know what's going on, and they can see the truth of things, even if you don't tell them. You can say, yes, I have moments that feel almost unbearable. Um, and just be super honest about it. So and of course allow them to actually say the words. It's okay if you're feeling XYZ. It's all right. Tell me how you're feeling today. What's it like for you to have to go to school on your own? What's it like for you to not see your sister when you come home, or however that plays out, whether it's a sibling, it could even be a pet. I mean, we're not just talking about the loss of humans here. It could be any kind of a serious loss. We want them to be able to speak about it, because even if it's a loss that isn't big to us, it can feel very big to them. So, thank you so much for listening to me today. The next and last myth that we're going to discuss is keep busy. It's kind of related to all of these. They kind of all intertwine to create a mess when we're trying to heal. It's another excellent way to avoid the only way to, but the only way to move through healing into a better way of living, which is to actually face your grief event. I know all of you, or many of you have I've heard this so often. If I've asked someone how they're doing, they'll say, I just stay busy. Yeah, I just stay busy, and that kind of keeps my mind off it. But, our minds are not, uh, they don't just disappear. Those thoughts are still there. So I hope you will stop by the next time, and we'll check out the last one, the last myth called keeping busy. And encourage you to subscribe below, because I have a lot more other aspects about healing from grief that I'm going to create some videos about. And if you subscribe, you will be notified when they pop up. So just remember that hope dies in silence, and keep sharing and keep being honest. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.